What is it like to be a secular person and to live a secular life free of religion? Is it even possible? What about the opposition to religion? Is it reasonable to be anti-religious? This video is reviewing chapters 4 and 5 of this new book on secularization thesis. It was released by New York University Press just a few days ago. To find out the book's summary and its major claims, please watch my previous video. The link will be in the description. The book is written by sociologists of religion from the US and the UK, and if you watch this video to the end, you'll find out what, according to the authors, is a secular lifestyle, secular values, how do secular people deal with aging, life cycle rituals, and other matters. In addition, we'll discuss why being secular is not some unnatural aberration. Overall, chapters 4 and 5 provide us with lots of qualitative research in addition to quantitative data. Scholars often base their conclusions on in-depth interviews with secular people, and surprisingly, I'll begin this review not from chapter 4 but from chapter 5, where Kasselstrand, Zuckerman and Cragun suggest next proposition. The end stage of secularization is not widespread irreligion, but rather widespread religious indifference. And what do they mean by this? Well, they invite us to think back to the last time you debated whether wagons pulled by oxen were good or bad. Most of you probably never had such debates, right? Why? Because who cares about wagons pulled by oxen these days? It's simply irrelevant to most people in highly developed countries. The authors of the book make such analogy to demonstrate what religious indifference may look like. Why would you even talk or debate about religion in a secular society? In chapter 5, the authors provide examples of people who were raised in a secular environment by secular people. They had never set foot inside a church or temple, had never prayed, had never been told to worry about heaven or hell, having a genuinely hard time understanding how people could be religious. Sociologists also focus on the reaction of those who could not even imagine that such people exist on our planet. Many people also wrongly assume that if we discuss secularization of society, it must imply active opposition to religion. In fact, it's not. To agree that some society is secularizing, we don't have to see crowds of people that walk around and criticize religion non-stop. Just think about this. Secularization eventually must lead to religious indifference, where both religion and irreligion become non-issues. Why do you need non-religious activism or secular organizations when people in your society are already indifferent to religion? That's why the book states, irreligious organizations, religious criticism, and atheism activism are signs of secularization, in particular at the earlier stages. When religion still has some authority in society, there is a need for irreligious or secular activism, but that is not the end point of religious decline. In fact, secularization ultimately leads to religious indifference, where religion and irreligion become non-issues. It is a state when you don't mind whether some gods like Vishnu, Aphrodite, or Yahweh exist or not. It doesn't matter because it will not change your morality, your relationships, your job, your day-to-day decision-making, and so on. The authors draw from their qualitative study in Northern Europe and remind that many people there simply prefer to never talk about religion, even among relatives. Family members often have no idea who believes in what, because they simply never raise such topics, often assuming that friends and relatives don't believe in Christian doctrines, just as they don't believe in the legends of ancient Nordic religion. The only exceptions why religion could matter to such people is when it annoys them. When people use religion to justify harming others, religious people try to force their morality on others, or religious people or organizations receive privileges that are not also extended to non-religious individuals. Otherwise, the authors invite their readers to think back to the last time they debated whether wagons pulled by oxen were good or bad. Yes, we are aware that they did exist and may still exist in some less developed countries, but to oppose such wagons would require that the wagons be an important part of our society. Likewise, when religion has been differentiated from most spheres of society, such that people do not need any knowledge of religion to function on a day-to-day basis and rationalization is widespread, the end result is indifference, not opposition to religion. And this might sound a bit strange to some atheist activists, for example in some highly religious towns in the US. But many people in Scandinavia would be indifferent to both religious or anti-religious events, because they are already so secular that they see no reason to engage with religion at all. Ultimately, they reject not only religious, but also any counter-identities like atheism, anti-theism, and secularism. Indeed, scholars don't find many people calling themselves atheists in highly secularized societies. There is simply no point in calling yourself an atheist in a society where no one takes theism seriously. Next, the authors talk about the secular values. They remind that there is a common misconception or prejudice that secular people are immoral or live empty, nihilistic lives. In reality, numerous studies demonstrate that many non-religious people are more passionate about their ethical principles than those who are religious. Empathy and compassion are one of the key values we find in secular people. They tend to better understand others and teach their children being considerate of others. Various studies also demonstrate that they're strongly motivated by compassionate desire to alleviate unnecessary suffering, wanting to help refugees, supporting affordable healthcare, wanting to fight the climate crisis, supporting women's reproductive rights, being sensitive to racism, homophobia and transphobia, supporting death with dignity, and supporting animal rights. In his in-depth analysis of over 500 secular Americans, Jerome Badgett found that non-religious people also place a high value on empiricism, basing their beliefs on demonstrable evidence. They also have no problem expressing a humble position with a simple "I don't know," when they really don't know something or if they don't have enough evidence. Secular people also tend to be more open-minded and cosmopolitan, focusing on the unity of all humans. As a result, they have lower levels of tribalism, nationalism, or patriotism. By the way, if you are really interested in this topic, you may want to check this book by Phil Zuckerman, What It Means to Be Moral, or simply watch one of his interviews about the book, for instance with Michael Shermer. Here, Zuckerman summarizes his major arguments really well. Going back to the book, the author suggests that the idea that non-religious individuals are any less moral or ethical is more likely a well-used canard that is possibly designed to frighten religious people so they avoid contact with the non-religious, reducing the odds that they will leave religion as well. Another important observation is that around the world, from India to Kenya, there are many thousands of secular organizations and communities, and secular groups can replace the social support provided by religions. At the same time, it's just a very tiny minority of secular people who really participate in such groups. Those who do often live in places where they feel threatened by the high presence or influence of religion. In such places, secular people unite not necessarily on what they value, but rather what they oppose. For example, violation of secular law by religions. Or they function as support groups for individuals who have had a traumatic experience with religion. But once they solve their traumas, they often move on and join some other organizations for community. After all, there are thousands of groups around all sorts of hobbies. These communities are very organic and typically focus on shared secular interests. Another misconception about secular people is that their rites of passage are dry and lacking in depth. The authors argue, however, that in reality secular people find in their life cycle ceremonies the same sense of awe, purpose, and significance in celebrating love, family, and special moments in life as do religious people. In many places there is a rising demand for secular life cycle celebrations. For example, in Scotland, humanist marriage ceremonies are at 23% more popular than Christian services. Humanist Society Scotland marry more Scots than do the two largest Christian churches, the Church of Scotland and the Roman Catholic Church combined. In addition, some studies suggest that non-religious funeral ceremonies in certain aspects could be more meaningful and personalized than religious ones. In the next section, Kasselstrand, Zuckerman, and Cragun claim that in many parts of the world, religion is no longer considered to be a fundamental, necessary aspect of child rearing and in socializing children to be moral citizens with honorable character. This table shows the percentage of adults in Chile, South Korea, Norway, and the US who select a specific quality as one of the top 5 most important for a child to be encouraged to learn at home. You may see the numbers on the screen. While the US stands out compared to the other 3 countries, sociologists provide data from previous decades that demonstrate that religious faith as an important child quality keeps declining. In the book, you may also find a list of the countries where fewer than 10% of the respondents selected religious faith as a top 5 important quality. At the same time, the countries where more than 70% selected religious faith are Bangladesh, Indonesia, Jordan, Nigeria, Tunisia, and Egypt. Countries that rank low on measures of modernization, just as secularization theory would predict. Also, the sociologists remind that less religious countries see tolerance, independence, and responsibility at the top of the list. But highly religious countries with relatively low levels of modernization believe that obedience is one of the top 5 qualities that children should learn in the home. Here is an interesting book by Crystal Manning, who studied non-religious families and found that secular parents usually don't like any type of indoctrination. They want their children develop their own viewpoints, opinions, and beliefs. In the US, for example, religious parents want their kids to focus on obedience to authority, but secular parents want them to choose thinking for oneself. I hope you can feel the difference. And after discussing all this, the authors conclude that in societies where autonomy and independence are valued, children will be less likely to develop a salient religious identity. What is kind of obvious if we consider what I mentioned before. But here is another important thing. Many secular parents do not intentionally raise their children to be secular. They simply encourage them to think for themselves and to make their own decisions. Therefore, no surprise that the authors state, after all, as we noted earlier, successful transmission of religion to a new generation requires explicit and sustained effort by parents and other agents of socialization. Raising a child outside of faith tradition does not. In the book, you may also find a separate section on aging, regarding so-called principle of religious procrastination. When people presumably turn to religious commitment as they age, authors draw from qualitative study in Sweden and demonstrate that Swedes that are over 70 years old aren't that different from their young co-citizens. Only 4.1% of those who are 70 and older describe themselves as extremely or very religious, compared to the 23.9% who are extremely or very non-religious. Besides that, 9 out of 10 Swedes of this age also state that they are either very or fairly happy. The data do not suggest that their lives are deficient as a result of their secularity. In the case of Sweden, those aged 70 or older who do attend church monthly or believe in the afterlife are not significantly more happy or healthy compared to those who do not. So what does all this mean? That people of all ages can live a perfectly happy and fulfilling life without any religion. No doubt, many of you may say, come on, those elderly people live in Sweden. Of course they don't care much about religion because their life is almost perfect. They don't deal with much suffering, with such government support and pensions. They just travel and have fun. But is this not what we are all striving for? Anyway, the sociologists do understand that such objection may come, and there are studies that demonstrate that when existential security declines, people tend to turn to religion in times of pain and sorrow. Why? Because religion may serve as a compensator in the moments of struggle. But the authors think that such assumption has a major flaw. Indeed, for people who are religious, when dealing with cancer, chronic illness, addiction, or the death of a loved one, their faith can be a great source of comfort. But for people who aren't religious, it doesn't work this way. Kasselstrand, Zuckerman, and Cragun refer to various studies conducted on atheists with disabilities or atheists who had spinal cord injuries, and how they found comfort and support in their atheism and secular beliefs and values following their trauma. So, they didn't need religion to deal with their injuries. Our findings from a study in Sweden showed that parents of children with a life-threatening heart condition were no more or less likely to pray or hold religious beliefs than a control group who were not facing these hardships. Some studies demonstrate that it might be the opposite. Sometimes religious people in the moments of crisis may lose their faith or trust in God, or be angry at God over what happened. Some studies show that religion is not always as helpful in processing grief and tragedies as it is portrayed. Some people struggle when their prayers do not seem to be answered and feel despair when God does not intervene in a tragic event. Yes, occasionally when a serious tragedy will happen on a national level, people may gather in churches to support each other, but responding to the arguments of Grace Davy, the authors remind that yes, ceremonies of remembrance did involve churches, but churches can and often do serve secular functions. There are very few buildings that have the capacity and capability to quickly allow for large groups of people to come together at no cost to collectively celebrate or mourn. But you don't have to be religious to attend such events. When the COVID-19 pandemic happened, there wasn't some sort of religious revival among atheists and agnostics. Again, people who already found religion to be important were the ones whose faith was strengthened during the pandemic, but those who were non-religious did not massively turn to religion. Right now, in many places, churches still serve as a convenient place for people to gather on certain occasions, but it doesn't mean that it always be like this. Many of us simply socialize to do so, that's why we can observe it. So the main conclusion here will be that it's possible to live a happy, ethical, and fulfilling life without religion. Moreover, it's possible to have a society where the role of religion is minimal, but where we find security, joy, happy families, friendship, and trust. In such society, we may find meaning in secular rituals, traditions, and a sense of community. People there would care for one another, they would be addressing poverty, the relief of suffering, human rights, and many other social issues without necessarily being religious. Now let's move to Chapter 4. In Chapter 4, Is Being Secular Unnatural?, the authors come up with 4 major claims. The historical record offers evidence that there have always been secular people going back thousands of years. Second, there are currently hundreds of millions of secular people in the world today. Third, there are some societies in which the majority of the population is secular. And fourth, there exists multi-generational evidence showing that religion reproduces itself through socialization. So when children are raised secular, they almost always stay secular as adults. While many scholars think that religion is something normal and inevitable, but secularity is an artificial, unnatural, and almost unhuman mutation, the authors claim we have plenty of evidence of secularity going back as far as we have written records of human civilization. This is important to stress because it counters the myth that being secular is some new, artificial, modern mutation. On one hand, the authors agree with the assumption that religion is natural in a sense that any and every observable aspect of humanity has only natural sources. It's part of our bioevolutionary foundation. But what they disagree with is that religiosity is somehow more normal, more healthy, more properly human, and inevitably more in line and more in accordance with our essential human nature that secularity is. When someone claims that we are born believers, or to live secular life is analogous to crab walking backwards, this is what they cannot accept. Relying on historians, the sociologists demonstrate examples of religious skepticism from ancient India, China, Greece, Israel, and later the Arab world. Yet they save your time and, without going into details, mainly list the authors who have done prior work on that. But they also rely on evolutionary psychologists and demonstrate that disbelief is just as natural as religious belief. I would even say they hold a very careful approach and state that by providing the above examples, we are not making the claim that historical illustrations of non-believers demonstrate definitely that secularity is just as natural as is religiosity. Such historical evidence simply bolsters our position that secularity has always been around, and as such is just as much a normal, natural part of the human condition as religiosity. And the major reason why non-religion appears to be so weird is because of social stigma associated with that. Dominant religions throughout the millennia have almost always been tied to political power and oppressive authority, making any public expression of secularity often taboo, if not dangerous or downright deadly. About the stigma and discrimination against atheists, even in the 21st century America, you may watch my recent video on the channel. The link will be in the description. Today, however, we live in a different world, where a massive proportion of humanity is openly secular, and the stigma against non-believers is slowly fading. But what is more interesting is that societies where secularity is widespread have not collapsed into chaos. As we see it from chapter 5, secular people are capable of building healthy, secure, and prosperous societies. And finally, the authors recognize that we may never find out how religion initially arose, but we have enough data to understand why religion continues to exist. They provide data and claim that in many ways it has to do with our socialization. Babies do not start out religious, they have to be taught religion. And when these kids grow up and have kids of their own, the cycle is repeated or not. In other words, our parents strongly shape our religiosity or lack thereof. And if religion is not a part of our socialization, then we will most likely be secular. These are the main claims of these two chapters. If you found it meaningful, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Remember that this is how YouTube's algorithms work. Every like and every comment helps a couple dozen more people see this video. Also, if you enjoy this video, you may enjoy some of my other videos, so make sure to check out my channel. I wish you peace and health wherever you are.